If I were broke tomorrow and somebody handed me a banana and said, you need to make a living selling bananas, I would find some way to become a millionaire again selling bananas within a year. That's just, I'm a rainmaker. Like that's where it comes from. Even though I'm an author and like I enjoy that, the flip side of it is the business. And I'm selling a product. So I have to be able to take a step back and look at that book and say, okay, what is the best way to get this out in front of people to stand out in that crowd?
JD Barker, welcome to the Entrepreneur Next Door. It's an honor to have you. Please introduce yourself.
So in today's world, I'm a New York Times bestseller. I write fiction, primarily thrillers, but I bounce back and forth between thrillers and horror. Kind of came up in this industry working as a ghostwriter and a book doctor. And I wrote pretty much anything back then, anything from memoirs for politicians and sports figures to finishing a romance novel for somebody else. If it was writing, it was a good story, I was in. Writing has always been my go-to to keep sane, my hobby, the thing I do for fun. My parents encouraged that, but they also, drove it home with a little caveat, like writing is a fantastic hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You got to get a real job. So I ended up in the corporate world. I worked in finance for a little over 2 decades, but I would come home and I would write at night because I was always my safe space. That was the thing I liked to do. Eventually, I just pulled the trigger on it and went full time.
You are very humble. I'm going to read 2 quotes of what people say about you. J.D. Barker is one of a kind writer that's a rare and special thing. Stephen King comes to mind, Lee Child, John Sanford, all one of a kind. And the guy that wrote that is James Patterson, who everybody knows. Here's another one. J.D. Barker is a New York Times and international best-selling American author whose work has been broadly described as suspense thrillers, often incorporating elements of horror, mystery, science fiction, and the supernatural. Kind of like describing 2025 to me up there.
Yeah, I think that one's from my Wikipedia page. That actually came from Dean Koontz, if you're familiar with Dean Koontz. He helped me put that together. So very early on in my career, I was scared to death of having to write the same book over and over again. Because when you work in this world, you hear from authors that get stuck in that. They'll write a book, all of a sudden it hits, and the publisher wants that same book, but different for the next 20 years. I didn't want to be that guy. I love horror. I love thrillers. I wanted to do both. So Dean told me to basically make sure I bounce back and forth from a writing standpoint, which I've always done. First book was horror, next one was a thriller, then back to horror, and I've always done that. And he told me by doing that, the fans are going to come along. And he grabbed people from the different audiences and bring them into the fold. But for my Wikipedia page, he basically helped me craft that sentence. So my novels are suspense novels, which kind of walks that line between a lot of different things. And it says that they may include elements of horror, may include elements of this, elements of that, which allows me to branch off into these different genres. As long as I keep suspense at the root core as my common thread, it all works.
So this is a show about entrepreneurship, and my definition of entrepreneurship, that's my personal definition, is someone who puts everything on the line to make a difference in the lives of other people, right? So it's short and sweet, not your typical Harvard definition or any other one. It really goes to the soul of people who decide to be entrepreneurs, to literally not get a job, put everything on credit cards, do whatever they have to do. So interestingly, in one of my notes, I said, JD, I'm going to play your dad and say, Jonathan, you like to write so much. Why don't you first get a job, then you write at night? And you said you went that route and it happened. When did you know you wanted to be a writer? How far back can you take it?
The earliest memories I have of it, we grew up without a TV in the house, which in the 70s wasn't saying much because there were 3 channels to watch. There was nothing on TV worth watching anyway. But we hit the library all the time, a couple times a week. I've got a sister that's 15 months younger than me, and I remember writing stories, and I would staple them together, and I created a library in my room, and she would check those stories out. I would charge her late fees. I was probably 5 or 6 years old at the time, so like it goes way back. And it's funny because in school, it was always like the subject that I never had to study for. I knew how to intrinsically do it. And I think it's mainly because I read so much. If you read a lot, the structure of a story basically gets ingrained in your head. Like I can see that framework in a story just because I've seen it so many times over and over again. So my parents were telling me like, you can't make a living now. They didn't even want me to be an English teacher because for a while there, that's what I'm thinking I was going to do. They're like, you need to do something else. They wanted me to be behind a desk doing something lucrative, mainly because that's not what they had. My dad was a contractor. He grew up working outside 5 o'clock in the morning. He was pounding a hammer. My mom was the same way. So every parent wants something better for their child. So I think when you're doing manual labor, that's thought something better is a corporate desk job. When you actually have that corporate desk job, it may not necessarily be what's better.
Yeah.
In my world, yeah, I was working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter while I was in the finance world for 20 some years. And over that time, I ended up with 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list, all that had other people's names on the cover that I had written, which gets old after a while. When that 6-1 hit up, my wife pulled me aside and she said, listen, I know you want to become a full-time author. Let's find a way to make that happen and get you out of this corporate job. She came up with this crazy plan. We were basically at that point, we were trapped because I had a very strong salary. My salary was about $250,000 a year plus bonuses. We had the lifestyle that supported that. We had a big house, we had cars, we had a boat. It was expensive. Our monthly nut was anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000. So I couldn't just walk away from that job. I was stuck in that job. So she came up with this crazy plan. We sold everything that we owned. We bought a tiny little duplex in Pittsburgh. We rented out one side to some tenants. We moved into the other side and basically got to the point where we could live off of that rent coming in from our tenants and off of our savings account. That gave me the opportunity to basically walk away from that job and focus on writing.
Absolutely incredible. If you were actually in Shark Tank, the sharks would just, especially Mark Cuban, would just be clapping and saying, wow, you're the epitome of entrepreneurship. And again, an author, writer, for me, you're an artist. Just like a painter, a photographer, it's a tough way to make a living. Your wife is brilliant. She supported you. She said, look, instead of torturing ourselves of what we're missing, let's live a modest life and give you a shot at something that you're already proving is talented, the talent that you have. What does writing mean to you? So you publish a book and it has a story. Do you think about the reader, or are you immersed in the plot? And
I tend to think of it almost as if I'm sitting around a campfire and I'm telling the story to one person, to a small group of people. Sometimes I'm telling the story to my wife, but I always try to focus on that, try to bring it home as close as possible. Because I think if you tend to think that you're just going to write a book and it's just going to go out to an audience and you don't know who's going to read it, this and that, I think you lose something there. It really, I like to capture the feeling that you have if you're sitting across from somebody one-on-one and telling them a story. That's essentially, I think, where I try to focus.
I love your genre because that's the only thing I ever read other than marketing books. Right? This is my escape into the universe of suspense thrillers. The business question for you is, there are so many authors. You have the traditional publishing houses. You've got anybody and their cousin 3 times removed writing books and self-publishing. Crowded market, right? How do you break in? And I'll go back to maybe not the books you ghostwrited, but your first book. Were you nervous that it's going to have the same success that the ghost books you wrote?
I have that same feeling with every book, but I think a lot of it comes back to that entrepreneurial spirit that you mentioned. I think entrepreneurs recognize opportunity. You could sit in a room, somebody is talking about something, they'll say whatever it might be, and something will go off in your brain going, that's the idea, that's what you chase, that's what is going to work. I know if I were broke tomorrow and somebody handed me a banana and said, you need to make a living selling bananas, I would find some way to become a millionaire again selling bananas within a year. I'm a rainmaker. That's where it comes from. Even though I'm an author and I enjoy that, the flip side of it is the business. And I'm selling a product. So I have to be able to take a step back and look at that book and say, okay, what is the best way to get this out in front of people to stand out in that crowd? When I published my first book, Forsaken, there were 700,000 books published that same year. Last year, there was a little over 1.5 million. Next year, they're expecting that number to be 2 million. That number is increasing. And with AI, it's getting even more and more crowded. My focus is always on what do I do to make my books stand up above that crowd. So it comes down to the same things. It doesn't matter what you're selling. If you're selling phones, you're selling cars, it comes down to branding, it comes down to name recognition, product placement, reviews on those products, word of mouth. That's by far the biggest seller for me. And I tend to focus on that. Every book that I put out, I know I can market it. I throw dollars at Facebook and create ads and put ads on television. I can do that all day long. But the one thing that's actually going to sell books in a meaningful number for me is one person reading it and going, holy crap, what did I just read? And they have to tell 3 of their friends about it. And that I chase that with every single book.
Yeah. And you just described basically marketing, right? You identify a niche, you differentiate, rise above the noise, above the crowd. And then you cater to the people that you make a difference in their lives, and somebody reads a book. There's nothing like reading a book that grabs you from page one and living through that tension and suspense till the end, and then sitting down and saying, wow, right? It's for me, it's an escape. I absolutely love it. I'm assuming that for a lot of other people, it's the same thing. So you build a tribe of loyal followers who know that your next book isn't going to disappoint.
Right.
But to really grow in a consistent, sustainable way, you need to steal readers from other people, right? How do you go about that? Because that's the business part, right?
That comes back to what we had mentioned or talked about early on, as far as me bouncing around from genre to genre. The business itself, if you're with a traditional publisher, it's almost backwards, because you turn in a book to your agent. That agent is immediately going to say, okay, this is a thriller author. They tell your editor, this person's a thriller author. That editor tells the marketing staff, you're a thriller author. They go back to the bookstores, and that's what they tell them, that you're a thriller author, so they know where to put you on the shelves. But you get put in this particular box and you're stuck there. So at one point, like, I was told my readership was women 45 and over. That was my primary core audience. The publishers they love that, because that's a great place to be. Women tend to buy a lot of the books, and they tell their husbands and boyfriends and things about those books, and that's how it spreads. But I heard that, and my first thought was, okay, how do I pick up a different? So even by bouncing around from genre to genre, if I write a thriller and now all of a sudden I write a horror book, a lot of my thriller fans are going to reach over and they're going to read that horror book. I'm going to reach out to people that have never heard from me before, because now I'm writing in a different genre. So when I heard that my audience was women 45 and over, I wrote a book called She Has a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be, which is very much a young adult book. It's basically my retelling of Great Expectations. And I marketed that as young adult. And within a year, that number dropped. I was picking up readers at a much younger age. So it's no longer women 45 and over. It's still women, but now it's, I think, 23 the last time I looked, and over. I look at my overall audience. This is who's buying my book. That's fantastic. Let's hope they continue to buy the book. But how do I get these people who aren't buying my book? And that's what I focus on.
So I want to talk to you about a concept that so people that are watching us and listening to us, yeah, they're entrepreneurs or business owners. They're marketing people. They're from different walks of life. And I would say that any one of those at some point thought about writing a book, especially if you do what I do, which is a business transformation coach. When I first started, people told me, you want to know the formula for success? I'll tell you what it is. You have to network, you have to speak, and you have to write a book. Okay? You got those three, boom, you dress up as somebody who has integrity and credibility, and people are just going to run off and hire you. Sadly enough, didn't happen. And guess what? Everybody else has told the same thing. I can't tell you how many times I was offered. I'm a writer. I'm a creative person. I was offered by people who poach and go after coaches. Hey, I'll write a book for you. I'll just put the cover up, put your name on it, because you need to be an author. And I said, that's not cool in my life. If I'm going to do anything, it has to be my own thing. So for all of us who either thought about it, engage in writing, there's something called writer's block. I'll let you define it, but my personal mentor, his name is Seth Godin. I don't know if you've come across him. He's, to me, the absolute brilliant marketing genius of our generation. So he had a chance to work with, is he like the father of science fiction?
He's the first one I read when I was a kid. Like that.
So Seth had a chance to work with him or do something with him. And at that point, Isaac wrote 400 books. So Seth asked him, how do you do that? So this is what Isaac Asimov said. I get up every day at 6:30 a.m. I sit down in front of my manual typewriter and I type until noon. It doesn't matter if I type good stuff or bad stuff. So the idea is, and that's in Seth's words, and this drives right into everything about Seth. If you're going to just go and create, in Seth's words, it's ship it. Ship it in Seth languages. If you have something to say, just publish it, okay? Just write it and let it out. It doesn't matter how many likes you're going to get or whether it's good or bad. And his idea is, by writing a lot of bad stuff, you're actually on your way to writing something great. right?
Sure.
If you stop the process, you're never going to get there. So when I ask you again, is there such a thing as writer's block? Have you experienced it? How do you overcome it?
I've heard the term a million times. I personally have never experienced it, or maybe I have and I just powered through it. But I think what you just touched on is huge. I talk to a lot of people that tell me that the same thing. I want to write a book. I want to write a book. Why don't you write a book? I don't have enough time. I was in the corporate world. I was working 60 to 80 hours a week. I would find time to write. I could be standing in line at the grocery store, pumping gas into my car, whatever it is. I'd break out my phone or a notepad and I would scribble something down. The truth is you only have to write about 200 to 300 words a day and you've got a novel or a book within a year. It's a matter of perseverance. I tell people it's a lot like going to the gym. You're not going to get fit and strong if you don't go on a fairly regular basis, and you have to keep at it. The writer muscle is the same thing. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So I do a lot of what you just mentioned with sets. Like back in the day, I would just scribble down whatever I could, whenever I could. Today's world, I'm a full-time author, so my schedule is a little bit more flexible, but I purposely keep it regimented. I sit down at my desk at 7 a.m. and first thing I do is start writing. I don't turn the internet on until I get my words for the day. I typically do 2,000 to 3,000 words per day because that's a distraction and I don't want it. I want to just write. If I run into a particular scene where I don't know where it's going to go, I will just write something out. I've got no problem hitting that delete key, but I find very much what Isaac Asimov said. You pound it out, put a paragraph there, another paragraph. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You backtrack over it, but it keeps that brain going, keeps it the fluidity of the process working. So I've never had writer's block.
And by the way, the reason why he was using a manual typewriter, and I understand there's a reawakening of manual typewriters because you want something that doesn't have a delete key and is not connected to the internet. So you commit it and you do this. So one thing I always wanted to ask someone like you, where do you get the ideas? So you finish the book, you're done. Okay, the book is out. You do what you do. Is there a trigger in your brain that just out of the blue comes up with something, or you come across something in life and then you say, oh, that's interesting, and you take and you run with it?
It comes from a lot of different places. I've got a note app on my phone, literally called Ideas, where I drop everything in there. I live on an island off the coast of Portsmouth in New England. I go for a run every day at 3 o'clock and essentially think about what I'm going to write the next day or whatever I'm working on. That's my process. At one point, I run across the beach, and if I stand on the beach of my island, it's called Newcastle, and look out, there's another island off our coast that's real small. It's only got one house on it, maybe an acre worth of land, little white house with a red roof. And it's about a quarter mile off the mainland, off our island. I used to stare at it all the time. Like, what is going on out there? Who owns it? Who would want to live out there? Would I want to live out there? But constant thoughts, just trying to figure it. I call it the what if gene. What if this happened? What if that happened? Ultimately, I got to know the people who own the island, and it's currently owned by the town of Kittery. And a friend of mine was in the habit of rehabbing the whole thing and turning it into a museum. It used to be a Coast Guard life-saving station. But he took me out there one time on his boat, and I was standing in it while I was in the middle of this rehab. And we started going through the history of this place. And it was used as a yellow fever quarantine zone during the Spanish-American War. It was a prison, like all these different things that had happened out there. And again, that fed that what if gene. You flash forward to today, my next book, it's called Something I Keep Upstairs. It's about that house. I basically wrote my own what if. So in my story, a 17-year-old kid, his grandmother owned the house. She passes away and leaves it to him. So here's a 17-year-old high school kid who all of a sudden has his own house on an island. He does exactly what you would expect him to do. He turns it into a party house for him and his friends. It's someplace for them to be able to go where the parents can't keep an eye on them. And they do that for a little while, but eventually get bored and somebody brings something up. Hey, what would it take to turn this into a haunted house? And the tagline for the book is, for a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die. So you know where it's going. I set that premise from the tagline being on the book. They start off with rather benign things and things escalate. All these things came together over the course of about 4 years, just random little thoughts, things that I would see, like this works for the book, this doesn't. I would learn something real about the house. A lot of the information I use in the book is based on real life, which to me adds a lot of fun to it, because if somebody jumps on Google and they actually research it, they're going to find a lot of the stuff that seems like fiction in the book is actually true. But that's how these things come together for me.
And you're running a contest
Right.
a contest for someone to win. I don't know if it's in that house, but to actually go to a haunted house and stay there for 24 hours, completely disconnected from the universe.
See, This is where the entrepreneur in me comes out. The book is done. It's at my publisher. It's coming out in May. What can we do to promote this book? That I tend to do something called zigging instead of zagging. So whenever I've got a book coming out, I'll make a list of what everybody else is doing to promote their titles. Then I'll make a brand new list of things that nobody's doing. And that's what I tend to focus my efforts on. So with this one, we've got a haunted house. It's a legit haunted house. Like, it's got a history. It's got, paranormal investigators have been out there. It's on its own private island. So yeah, ultimately we're giving away an overnight stay. One person, we're going to draw their name. They're going to get to take 3 of their friends. We're going to put them in a boat, take them out to this haunted house on its own private island, drop them off on the dock, and leave them there for 24 hours. Now, that's fun if you're into that sort of thing. But what ends up happening is, like, the word of mouth that we're getting is insane because nobody has ever done anything like this. So I'm doing interviews with television, with radio, with people like you, talking about this contest because nobody has ever done it. So I search for those types of opportunities because, again, like, I can buy advertising if I want to. I can't buy word of mouth unless you come up with something that people are willing to talk about. And this is something that people are willing to talk about.
Yeah. And it's the audience that ideally would be attracted to a book like that.
Even if it's not, it's like we have, let's say, a paranormal investigator enters the contest. They're going to talk it up. They might have their own podcast. They might be writing a book of their own. They might be doing a television appearance, but they're going to talk about this haunted house that they're going to stay at. And that the fact that they're talking about it is going to get in front of X number of readers that do that type of book that will, go out and buy it. So it comes full circle.
I have 2 other quotes. I don't remember where I got them. Maybe it's from your bio or for something else. I want to read them and ask you for your interpretation. Contemporary publishing landscape demands authors to be more than just storytellers. They must become their own marketing powerhouse, social media strategists, and personal brand architect. You just proved that. So we can go on the next one. Publishers now openly admit that an author's platform often weighs as heavily as their manuscript when making acquisition decisions. A writer with 10,000 engaged Instagram followers might get a second look over one with more polished prose, but no social presence. I think you figured it out way before they did. As an entrepreneur who's growing his business.
Yeah, everybody knows you need brand awareness, right, in order to sell a product. That's essentially what it comes down to. Back when I was Fourth Monkey was up to in front of publishers, I think there were 5 or 6 publishers that wanted it. So I was doing the rounds of phone calls. They put me on speakerphone in a conference room at Random House at HarperCollins, these different places. The first thing they would always do is tell me how much they love the book. The second question was always, what's your social media presence like? And they wanted to know those particular stats. And I think back then they didn't quite understand how it worked. They just looked at the overall numbers. If you've got X number of followers, that means we're going to sell X number of books. That's not necessarily the case. I think it really is about engagement. They're really focusing very heavily on that.
Just because you have 1 million followers doesn't mean the 1 million people are buying your book. It doesn't work that way.
No. And honestly, like, storytellers have been around as long as people have been around. There was somebody standing up in a cave telling stories, pointing at pictures on the wall. If the power went out tomorrow, I honestly wouldn't care. I've got a manual typewriter right behind me. I know I could pick up a pen and a piece of paper and I could do exactly what I'm doing today. Yeah, I write books on these things actually right now. Like, I've got a book I'm working on that typewriter. I've got another one I'm working on a notepad. I purposely do it because my voice is different depending on the medium. So I like that. Changing it up just keeps it interesting for me. But I think for me anyway, it's one of those professions. Like, people have always been telling stories. The world can change as much as it wants. People are going to continue to tell stories. I plan to be the guy out there telling them.
Yeah, I'm actually reading The Fourth Monkey, and I like your style because it all depends on the reader, right? Some readers who like Tom Clancy want him to get into the nitty-gritty of the weapon system all the way down to the bolts and whatever. For me, I'm an action guy. Just keep it moving. I don't need to read 2 pages about some technical aspect of something.
For me, it just comes down to the story. Some stories are 300 pages long. Other ones are 900 pages long. She Has a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be, I think, was 927 pages. Yeah, I could have made it shorter if I wanted to, but then I wouldn't have been able to tell the story that I wanted to. You're reading The Fourth Monkey right now. The second one in that series is called The Fifth to Die. It was supposed to wrap up with those 2 books. While I was writing that book, like, I started looking at it, I was like, I could either cut half the story out and tell this in 2 books, or I can tell the full, and I opted to tell the entire story. So I think it comes down to the author, the story they want to tell. At least in my world, I wouldn't let a publisher dictate the size of the book to me.
So the new thing in publishing is a collaboration, right? Where you see a book and you got on James Patterson's radar and you collaborated with him on the book, or is just using his name? How does that work?
No, so he read, you're reading Fourth Monkey right now. So when that book was coming out, one of the things the publishers do is they send copies of that book, pre-publication copies, to all the big name authors, hoping to get one of those quotes, like the one that you read, at the start of this. When Jim read that, The Fourth Monkey, he actually liked it enough where he picked up the phone and we started talking about actually collaborating and working together. We ended up meeting for lunch down in Palm Beach. I grew up in that area, so I'm down there quite a bit. And at first, we didn't think we were going to be able to do it because he's a notorious outliner. He writes 30 to 50 page outlines for every book before he actually starts writing. At the time, I was what they called a pantser or a discovery writer. I would come up with my characters, my plot. I'd drop these people into the middle of the story and just let it play out. And that was like, I didn't know where the story was going. I felt the readers wouldn't be able to figure it out, but like I intrinsically wrote that way. Two totally opposite writing styles. So we walked away from that meeting thinking we weren't going to be able to work together. And then a couple of months later, we talked again and he said, you know what, let's go ahead and try it your way. Let's try pantsing a novel. So we actually wrote a book called The Coast to Coast Murders. I would write a chapter, paint him into some kind of crazy, impossible scenario, thinking he's never going to get out of this. I'd send him those pages, and 15 minutes later, he not only got out of it, but he put me in an even crazier situation. And we just went back and forth like that, writing the entire book. And it was a lot of fun. And I think he enjoyed it too, because he had never done it before. For me, when you write a book like that, you end up with a lot of words on the cutting room floor because you're feeling your way around. You write a scene, it may or may not work. So you get to the second draft portion and you have to trim a lot of this stuff away. It's almost like a good piece of steak. You trim the fat away before you throw it on the grill. So I ended up with a lot of words on the cutting room floor, which was just part of my process. But we finished up that book. He said, you know what? I want you to try it my way. I want you to just see what it's like. And he sent me an outline for a book called The Noise. And we wrote that one start to finish very seamlessly. We finished up the book. There was very little editing to do because we had that framework in front of us before we actually started. But we got it done in record time. So he actually converted me. Like I thought I was going to convert him over to the whole pantsy camp. And I've been outlining books ever since we did that one. We're at, I think, 5 books we've written together at this point. I'm his go-to guy when he comes up with a scary idea. He'll pick up the phone. Our latest one is called The Writer, which is just a straight up thriller. It's a woman, the police get called to her apartment in New York, and she's hovering over her husband's body. He's dead. It looks very much like she did it. And she asks for a specific cop to show up to investigate it. He doesn't have any clue who she is. He doesn't know why she requested him, but he's standing there. And it's this crazy tale that takes place. We had a lot of fun writing it. And I think that's part of the process too. Like financially, I do really well. I don't have to work with other people if I don't want to. But when somebody like James Patterson calls you up and has an idea for a book, like I see that not only as an opportunity to write that book, but it's a learning experience for me. He's taught me a ton about the process of writing, and we've had just as many conversations on the business side. He's the most successful author in the world, and he's gotten there because of his marketing abilities. He used to work in advertising in New York before he actually started writing. He wrote the Toys R Us theme song years back. That's where he started. So he took that entire knowledge base into books. And even today, the guy is 77 years old. We've got this book coming out in March. He is all over every piece of marketing material, every television ad. He's making sure that they are unique and they're different from what everybody else is doing. And I have my notepad and pen out every time I talk to the guy.
Amazing. So I have 2 more questions. One is Fourth Monkey takes place in Chicago. When you write about places, have you been there or can you make the stuff up?
It's a little bit of both. Like that one, like I grew up outside of Chicago. I grew up in a little town called Crystal Lake, about an hour north of the city. I used to take the train in when I was a kid to see the Cubs play. Again, this was the 70s, so your parents had no problem throwing you on a train and telling you to come back at the end of the day. I don't think you could get away with that in today's world. But I've got a lot of fond memories of Chicago, and because of that, I knew I wanted to write something in Chicago at some point. So I ended up writing that particular series there. When my wife and I lived in the duplex, we were just outside of Pittsburgh. So I wrote a couple of books that take place in the Pittsburgh area. My latest book, Something I Keep Upstairs, takes place on the island where I live, Newcastle, New Hampshire. So a lot of times I'll pull from real places, but I've got plenty of books too, where I'll just pick a random place on the map. Like this particular story feels like it would take place in the Pacific Northwest. So I will jump on Google Earth and find a city. And then I usually have a map open the entire time I'm writing. Just to make sure I get the streets right and traffic directions. Fans will call you out on weird stuff. So like in The Fourth Monkey, I had a scene very early on where your traffic was going in one particular direction. A person at the publishing company called me up and said, no, traffic actually flows the other way. And she had me change that early on because she was smart enough to know I would get 1,000 emails about it when that book came out if I didn't get it right. So it's a catch-22, but I like working in the real world.
The last question I have is when you lay out the plot, what's not the last question, one more. Do you know how the story ends or that unfolds as you write?
Now that I have outlines, I've got, pretty much the entire book, laid out in front of me, so I know where I'm going. But even when I was pantsing the novel, I would always come up with my beginning, something I knew I wanted to happen somewhere in the middle, and I had an ending in mind. And I think it's almost like going on a road trip. I think you need to know where your destination is. It's okay to take a turn and, visit some spot along the way and then get back on the highway. But like my subconscious always needed to know what that ending was going to be. And it would eventually lead the story in that direction. The ending would change a lot. Sometimes it would be completely different when I finished up the book versus what I had in mind when I first started it. But I always felt I needed to have something in mind.
And you get swayed as you write with thoughts of the readers like this, or it doesn't really matter. You stick to your story.
Yeah, I don't really think about the readers in general, like whether they would like it or not. I try to get the movie stuff out of my head. At this point, I've got 8 different books that have been optioned, and they're in various stages of Hollywood hell. And I've had a lot of conversation with producers, mainly budget stuff. It's this is what it's going to cost to film this particular scene. I've had books like when Jim and I were writing The Noise, it got optioned for television while we were actually writing the book. So those people were actually weighing in on the chapters as we wrote them. So they would come back and say, if we film that, it's going to be very expensive. Do you think you could do this instead? And like they would get involved in those conversations. So if anybody is raising their hand at this point, it's usually somebody on the business side. And then there's a legitimate reason for it. In my perfect world, nobody sees the book. Usually I'll write like the first chapter. I give it to my wife. She reads through it, tells me whether it's worth pursuing or not. Then I have a closed door policy. I don't show it to anybody until I get that first draft finished and it's polished to the point where I feel comfortable showing it to other people and getting opinions.
So when I was reviewing your background and studied you before the podcast, I came across an appearance you had or something that had to do with autism. And before we hit record, I asked you about it. And I thought it was a fundraiser and you did something with them, but there's more to the story, right?
Yeah, no, I was diagnosed with a form of autism called Asperger's syndrome back when I was 22. I'm 54 now, so I've been, working with it for 30 some years. I, flubbed my way through the first portion of my life because I wasn't sure what it was. I didn't know anything about autism. So that diagnosis was a real wake up call for me. But in a lot of ways, I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing today without it. I used to read a lot, and like the framework of stories basically got ingrained in my head. I see patterns in everything, including books, and that tends to come out on paper. And some of my earliest writing gigs, I was working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter. I used to write memoirs for people. So I would interview a politician, sometimes like a female politician, then I have to write a memoir in her voice, her point of view. And I was able to do that. And what I later learned is it's because I'm autistic. Autistic people like me, we tend to mimic people in a lot of social situations, a lot of real life situations. I realized I was able to mimic people on paper. So I could, complete their voice. If somebody put text in front of me written by somebody else, I could pick out the speech patterns, the vocabulary, the writing cadence, the pacing, and I could basically duplicate their writing style and continue it, which got me a lot of work as a ghostwriter back in the day. But in today's world, I know that came from autism. I wouldn't be able to do it without it. You can see my desk behind me. Like I'm working on 8 different books right now. There's literally not a scrap of paper behind me. It's all up here.
So we can't do a podcast without talking about AI. Can you read something that was produced by AI and spot it immediately?
Oh yeah, because it's horrible. But that's today. It's evolving so fast. I try to use it and try to stay on top of where all these things are. My favorite at this point is one called Claude because the
Me too.
writing is fairly solid.
Yep.
And I use it for certain things. If I need to create ad copy, I'll use Claude for that. I needed to write a press release the other day. So I just grabbed paragraphs of all these different things I wanted in the release, dumped it in there and said, create me a press release based on this material. And it would fire off a 1-page press release. And then I just had to go in and clean up, edit it, and get it ready to go out. So it saves 20, 30 minutes here or there. I do a lot of translations. So people will send me like their offers to translate a particular book. I'll dump that into Claude and say, here's the original text. Here it is in Italian. Was this done by an AI or was this done by a person? Is it good? And Claude is able to tell me. But from a writing standpoint, if I try to brainstorm with Claude, I'm literally talking to an encyclopedia. It can only regurgitate what it's already heard, what it knows. For an AI standpoint, like 1 + 1 always equals 2. When you're writing a thriller, 1 + 1 needs to equal 3. And an AI is not capable of making that creative jump. I think at some point it is going to have a creative thought of its own, And that may be a game changer, but who knows?
JD, this was absolutely fascinating. If I gave you a billboard in Times Square and I said, JD, put whatever message you want on there for people who are considering being either an entrepreneur or a writer, what would you put on there?
I would probably say ask the question, because a lot of times people don't ask the question. They'll come up with an idea, they'll be standing in front of somebody, a particular scenario, and like opportunity just passes them by because they're too afraid to open their mouth. They're too afraid of getting shot down. I would much rather ask the question, have somebody tell me no, and walk away knowing that I did ask, rather than walk away not asking the question and wondering what if for the rest of my life. So I am not afraid of asking the question, and I would like to see more people do that.
Again, another brilliant marketing commentary from you as an author, but clearly you're a polished marketer. Okay, thank you again. It's absolutely amazing to have you. I will tell Kate to make sure next time in New York, I'll sneak down. I'm an hour away, but I'll sneak in if I could grab you and say hi. And absolutely amazing that I got you to be on the show.
Oh, anytime. Just stay in touch with Kate. I've got a lot of books coming out.
I will.
More than willing to come back.